All right, welcome to Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I'm here with Corey Goode. And in this episode, we're going to start exploring some of the cosmic history of our solar system. So, Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I had heard about this super Earth well before you ever had anything to say about it. It is mentioned in the Law of One as the planet Maldek. And way back when I first got into all this stuff, Richard C. Hoagland, and all the years I spent studying his material from 1993 when I read Monuments of Mars, he was very big on the idea that the asteroid belt was not something that would normally appear in a solar system. So when we see these asteroids, your direct knowledge is that we're seeing a debris field of a ruined planet?
Yes.
And Hoagland's Top Insider told me about something called brilliant pebbles. And when you and I started talking, there was audible shock from you on Skype when I mentioned brilliant pebbles to you.
Right.
And why was that?
Because I'd heard of that program.
So could you, I can kick in some of what I heard about it, but this is mostly about getting you to talk. So what did you hear about brilliant pebbles?
A computer and mathematical program that was rebuilding from what they've studied of orbits in the belt, asteroid belt, to calculate back the size and density of what it used to be.
What used to be?
The asteroid belt, which...
And what was the conclusion of this program?
That it was a planet at one time.
Okay. Now, I got this information from Hoagland's Top Insider, who I refer to as Bruce. It's not his real name. And one of the things he said was that they were releasing rocks in space and then charting how they moved and using that to build very advanced computer models of how this would work.
The asteroid belt's been studied for a long time. It's been mined, and they know it very well. So, I mean, they took all of that telemetry and found a way to trace back what it would have looked like at a certain time period.
I think you've mentioned this before on the show, but it's good to repeat it right now. They were able to find different aspects of a planet in the asteroids.
Different strata. Yes.
So like the mantle, the core, the crust, these different things, they were able to see those different parts?
Right, and find different parts of the crust that had different mineral deposits that were even easier to get to than mineral deposits here on Earth.
When they went out and looked at these asteroids, they weren't just fresh asteroids, right? They had been, in some cases, mined thoroughly.
Right.
And there was a lot of ancient stuff on them.
Right.
Okay. So one of the other things that we have to talk about with the super Earth is Hoagland's original guy, Dr. Thomas von Flandern, who created what he called the exploded planet hypothesis, or EPH. And this is very complex scientific data, which doesn't just include the asteroids. It also includes orbital perturbations in the solar system, and it includes all the comets. And so he was of the belief that the comets were the pieces of ocean from the planet that froze and turned into ice, water ice. And von Flandern traced back all these comets and showed that they all actually, you dial it back, they all come to a single point of origin. Like that was where the oceans went to. So did you hear anything like that about the comets in Brilliant Pebbles?
There was ice in a certain region that came from the failed planet.
So that would have been the oceans that freeze-dried in space.
Right, the water from the planet.
Yeah. He was coming out of the military faction of the space program, and we're going to do a whole episode just on that. But he said that there's no extraterrestrials, that everything out there is ours, and it's just all advanced stuff that we know about. So that was another thing that was consistent with what you'd heard.
Right.
So from this military perspective, they created a narrative about ancient extraterrestrials that came and went and are not here now, but then they had this whole storyline built around it. He didn't use the term ancient builder race that I remember. That was something I heard from you.
I was wondering if he was talking about the same.
But he did basically give me the same information. Now, this was a weird thing because when I first started talking to you, I had taken his testimony at face value as being accurate. And what he was told, for whatever level of compartmentalization he was in, was that this ancient builder race, and we'll just use that term even though he didn't, the ancient builder race was 5 million years ago that all this stuff happened. But your data on the ancient builder race is actually much older than that.
Right.
What was the actual data that you were given for when these ancient builder race artifacts appeared?
They were many tens of millions of years old. Further back than any other type or signs of civilization or the newer ET groups that moved in, way past.
Did they have any ability to try to get a specific time, or was it just that it was countless millions of years old?
There's so very little that was known about them when they would find their structures. And every time they would find the structures that were especially exposed, there were places that obviously had glyphs on them, but had been wiped clean by other races that had come. So there was a lot of mythology among all the different groups that were creating a lot of mythology about them, but when it came down to brass tacks, very little was known about them.
Well, you had mentioned before a technology, chronological timing,
right,
that had been used for apparent Nazi remains on the moon and Mars that they apparently had traveled back in time to create.
Right.
Does that technology work if you go back many millions of years, or does it start to become a lot less accurate?
It works. It starts becoming less accurate, and you get wider time frames.
Okay, so what Bruce had originally said, this was something very interesting, because he told me it was an authorized disclosure from the United States government, that they didn't want to openly tell us this in like a major way, but that they were going to reach certain people who were seeding things into the UFO community and give them this information so that it became part of the public consciousness. And this was the first step. This
is how partial disclosure is going to work. They're going to tell people there's a atmosphere, a thin atmosphere on Pluto, that it has blue skies.
I just saw that last night, yeah.
There's,
and water.
Liquid water, on different planets. And then they're going to finally get to a point to where if they get to do their narrative of disclosure, this slow, partial disclosure narrative, and then they're going to try that narrative to talk about these ancient ET race that used to be here, that disappeared, that's very ancient, and that'll be probably the first bit of information people will get.
What kind of an effect are they thinking will happen if they say that there was an ancient builder race?
Well, they're prepping people for that already with a lot of the ancient alien narrative that's going on.
So the polls are showing that even in the most traditional parts of America, the parts that would not be open to new information, we're looking at a 57% rate of acceptance of the existence of extraterrestrial life. So the old idea that, War of the Worlds, it's all going to come crashing down, people will go into a panic, it's not going to happen if they tried to push out this narrative that some weird and interesting ancient race was here a long time ago.
Right, that's what they believe.
And is this super Earth, do you think, is going to be a major part of that first wave, talking about what the asteroid belt actually was before?
Yes, we'll probably hear some version of the history of our solar system that they learned.
The idea that Hoagland put forward also included the notion that Mars was a watery planet that was actually a captured moon around this super Earth, that both of them had oceans, and that this explosion that created the asteroids smashed into the side of Mars and caused excessive damage. Was that consistent with what you heard from the smart glass pads, or however it was that you came in contact with this information?
Yes, it was postulated that Mars was most likely a moon of that super Earth, and that it was damaged heavily on one side by massive impacts, and that most likely also stripped away its main atmosphere at the time, and it never recovered.
Never recovered.
Yeah, never fully recovered to what it was before.
So these people that settled on the super Earth, what we heard from Bruce was that he was told, they don't know for sure, there's a lot of mystery, but that it was between 3 and 10 different extraterrestrial groups that came passing through and settled in our solar system. He seemed to be thinking that whoever built all these ruins on all the different moons throughout our solar system was the same civilization that was on the super Earth. But in light of what you shared from this Inner Earth Alliance, these people that were on the super Earth do not appear to be the ancient builder race.
No, they're not the ancient builder race.
Okay.
And it seems that more recent information that I've gotten is telling us that the Earth received refugees from, at different points in history, from a couple of different planets, at least in our solar system, where the planets failed and inhabitants left and came to Earth as refugees.
And that would be Mars and the super Earth?
Yes.
And again, that's completely consistent with what the Law of One actually says. They described the super Earth, they call it Maldek, and they say that it blew up. I believe the figure they give was 800,000 years ago. So it's not exactly the same as the data that Brilliant Pebbles calculated, because when I spoke to this guy, Bruce, they were having it as about 500,000 years ago.
Right.
So is that what you saw in the Brilliant Pebbles data as well?
Right.
Okay. So another thing that was a big part of what Bruce shared with me was that the people on the super Earth were starting to build a ring around Saturn that was made of some sort of transparent aluminum alloy. And that if the ring had completed, they would have a pulse weapon that they could use to destroy other worlds. He said that this weapon was attacked and destroyed at the same time the super Earth was destroyed, and that the shattered remnants of it formed the rings of Saturn, and that they would go out there and study these pieces of these habitable, there were actual rooms people could live in inside this shattered ring. That you could still go out and look at. Did you encounter any of that information?
I encountered information about there being, the rings being full of artifacts similar to that, but I had not heard the information about it being a giant weapon.
What was the specific data that you got about that?
That it had the transparent alloy in it.
Really?
Yeah, and but it had it had debris that looked like it was a part of structures.
Wow, broken structures.
Yeah, completely,
very interesting.
Yeah, destroyed.
Okay. Now, I also want to point out that Bruce said that on the edge of the B ring were the biggest chunks of the ring, and that's where it originally was. So let's take a look right now at a couple of images of these alleged ice crystals on the B ring. So if you're looking at this image, what you're seeing now is shadows that are cast, and as we zoom in on that, you see there are actually some pretty big chunks there, and those shadows actually cast onto the rings. So what we heard from Bruce is that those alleged ice crystals are actually large pieces of rooms that people could live in, but these are people of an extreme height. Now, this is another area where our data correlated. Bruce told me that these rooms were built for people who would be like 70 feet tall. Now, did you hear about there being ruins that were built for people of that type of size and stature?
Right. Yeah, we've talked about different ruins being found with huge stone chairs and ceilings and doorways that were obviously, and table-type platforms that were obviously built for people much, much taller. A lot of this ancient stuff that's found is also from the age of when there was a super Earth and that kind of thing.
Okay, so there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, there's some crossover. So, but a lot of the they seem to be like the slabs that they have found of the ancient builder race that are obviously not sarcophagus, but that people lay on for healing.
Okay.
Humans when the humans would lay on them, they were a lot bigger than what was needed for a human to lay on.
Did they still work for healing?
Yes.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. The ring you never heard about, but you did hear about the shattered remains of something that was there.
Yeah.
Okay. So to continue with Bruce's story then, enemies, he said that whoever was on this super Earth had been a very warlike species, and that they had gone out and they had really pissed off some people in other star systems. Did you hear that the people on the super Earth had a technology that would allow them to have left the solar system and made war on other planets in other solar systems?
I was with scientific people that were looking at brass tacks, mostly scientific data. A lot of the information that is pouring out in this manner comes from different groups postulating from their root beliefs. There are different groups, secret Earth government syndicate groups that have different occultic beliefs that are tying all these different narratives, and there's really not that much known, I mean, fully known, but there are a lot of people trying to tie themselves to bloodlines from these planets, or tie their mythology to these narratives somehow. So I just basically saw a lot of the scientific data and information, and was not exposed to a whole lot of the theoretical.
Well, let's just extrapolate off of what you do know. Clearly, the people on the super Earth had technology vastly in excess of what we have now.
Right.
Clearly, they had the ability to travel to another planet in the solar system, Saturn, and build this massive, massive, massive structure. I mean, the size of Saturn. To actually build a ring that's going to go 2/3 of the way around it is almost an unthinkable architectural achievement.
And the people in the Inner Earth Council stated that the different inhabitants of the planets in our solar system were extremely advanced technologically and extremely aggressive, and that they destroyed their civilizations and had to be relocated here as refugees by other ET races that came in.
And again, that's remarkably precisely what the Law of One says, which you hadn't read when this happened to you. And
it still happened.
So, did this civilization that was on the super Earth also settle Mars at the same time if it had oceans and water?
The freshest information that I have is that these are two different groups that independently arose on these different planets, even though one may be considered a moon.
My personal speculation, based on trying to connect the dots in the law of one, has been that Mars was heavily damaged by the explosion, but it wasn't completely damaged past the point where some type of life couldn't cling to it, even if maybe it involved a lot of underground bases that might have already been built before this happened.
Right.
You think that's possible?
Right.
Okay. Because in the law of one...
But the surface, the previous ecosystem was gone.
Right, but they could have had a vast underground infrastructure still in place.
They were both advanced civilizations. Then, yeah, that would make sense.
Okay, so then the next thing was, and this is going to start to segue into what we're going to keep talking about in the next episode, the moon. Instead of me blabbing my big mouth, let's keep it simple and have you tell us, where did the moon come from? What the heck is going on with the moon? Our Earth's moon.
Okay. According to the smart glass pads and what was reported is that, and this is very controversial, that the moon arrived right around that also 500,000 year time period.
Arrived?
Arrived.
Okay, we're going to have to clarify what that means.
Well, it arrived and formed some sort of tidal lock with the core of the Earth.
Oh, it arrived to the Earth.
To the Earth. And into an orbit that changes very little over time. And it came here from the explosion from the super Earth.
It came here.
Right.
So it drifted over from as the super Earth blasted, that the moon drifted and somehow got gravitationally captured by the Earth?
Some of the information was that it was under intelligent control, that it was that it was artificial, and that it was bringing refugees here.
Some of the information. So not all the information said the same thing?
Right. There was always opposing with every time you had information, you had like peer review type information, opposing view, why this could also mean this, and even that was always present. But you always had to read the bottom and also see that there were other views, even though that was accepted by most of the peers.
Who are the peers?
Other scientists.
Which faction are we talking about? ICC or?
Well, that would be most likely a joint. They all speak the same language, agree on the same kind of stuff, but I don't know what standard it was, but they had a peer review process. It wasn't just one scientist couldn't just do an experiment and come to a conclusion and then put it in the database as fact. It had to go through a process as well.
And I think it's interesting for people to understand that they don't have all the answers. They're doing research and they're trying to connect the dots with an archaeological expedition, the same way that we would find an ancient city and dig it out and then have to study the pots and study the writing and see if we can decipher the writing and all this kind of stuff.
Right. And they try to stay away from a lot of the mythology from the different groups. There's different groups that have a lot of different ideas about who all the different people were. There's different narratives from different groups.
Different extraterrestrial groups, you're saying?
The people that came from these planets that were destroyed or lost their viability, that brought the refugees here to the surface of our planet. There are different groups have different descriptions of who these people are. Different narratives that fit their belief systems.
So there is no absolute standard of what actually happened that anybody can agree on at this point.
Right.
Well, that's frustrating, but I guess that's the result of if different people are saying different things, they can't all be right.
Right.
It's just like with religion.
Right.
And these are probably like religions, right?
Yes.
They are religious beliefs in a sense.
Well, they are. They're all these different Earth government syndicates have different occultic roots. And they try to tie everything to their root occult beliefs, try to fit everything into the narrative of their beliefs.
So you were told by the people in the inner Earth, based on their information, and they're right here in our backyard, so if they've been around as...
Under our backyard.
Some of them have been around for, as you were told, 17 to 19 million years.
17 to 18 million.
17 to 18. That's a long time.
Right.
That would mean that whatever happened to this super Earth was long after they were here to witness whatever was taking place.
Correct.
So that's a very interesting perspective that they would have had. And you said in the previous episode that they were quite upset when refugees from these destroyed planets, both the super Earth and Mars, were eventually transplanted and put on Earth.
Yes.
Why were they so unhappy about that?
Because this race was very aggressive and immediately began to assert itself on this planet and interbreed with the surface humans that were naturally from this planet, interbreed with each other, the other groups, and all ended up mixing together into a largely mixed race that they consider us a mixed human race on the surface.
And that aggressiveness is what makes us, to them, very dangerous?
Yes, very unpredictable, dangerous.
One of the other things that Bruce said that I want to run by you is how people are going to be saying, and we're going to get back to you talking about refugees, but how did this ring built around Saturn become a weapon? So I just want to explain what he said, what their intel told them. Apparently, it's like Tesla's earthquake machine. If you go back and look at the Roman soldiers marching across a bridge, they had to march out of step. And if all the soldiers march at the same speed, the bridge starts to shake up and down and will eventually come apart. Tesla's earthquake machine apparently involved a similar concept where there's a rhythmic series of thumps and it builds up a resonance wave that eventually creates a massive earthquake. So what he said was that the ring was designed to send pulses into Saturn, and those pulses would reflect back out to the ring and then back into the planet, and it would just build up this incredible charge. And then the ring could actually direct the beam to any location in three-dimensional space that it wanted to go. They could triangulate the beam to basically any location. Now, this sounds an awful lot like a movie that we all know and love, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One of the other things that Bruce said was that Star Wars was actually not just fiction, that it was a disclosure film. And when we start talking about a ring around Saturn that can be a planet-killing weapon, that sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it?
Right. There are a lot of different little caveats in Star Wars. Some of the ships from the Empire look very similar to the Dark Fleet vessels. Some of the concepts of the Force and the Dark Lord Siths I've found to be consistent with some of these cults, syndicate cults that Illuminati groups believe very strongly in. The dark part of the source field, may the source be with you. Okay.
So in the next episode, these two definitely go together. We're going to get into what exactly happened with the moon and really delve into that story. That's coming up next time here on Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host. What used to be?
the asteroid belt, which...
And what was the conclusion of this program?
That it was a planet at one time.
Okay. Now, I got this information from Hoagland's top insider, who I refer to as Bruce. It's not his real name. And one of the things he said was that they were releasing rocks in space and then charting how they moved and using that to build very advanced computer models of how this would work.
The asteroid belt's been studied for a long time. It's been mined, and they know it very well. So, I mean, they took all of that telemetry and found a way to trace back what it would have looked like at a certain time period.
I think you've mentioned this before on the show, but it's good to repeat it right now. They were able to find different aspects of a planet in the asteroids.
Different strata. Yes.
So like the mantle, the core, the crust, these different things, they were able to see those different parts?
Right, and find different parts of the crust that had different mineral deposits that were even easier to get to than mineral deposits here on Earth.
When they went out and looked at these asteroids, they weren't just fresh asteroids, right? They had been, in some cases, mined thoroughly.
Right.
And there was a lot of ancient stuff on them?
Right.
Okay. So one of the other things that we have to talk about with the super Earth is Hoagland's original guy, Dr. Thomas von Flandern, who created what he called the exploded planet hypothesis, or EPH. And this is very complex scientific data, which doesn't just include the All right, welcome to Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I'm here with Corey Goode. And in this episode, we're going to start exploring some of the cosmic history of our solar system. So, Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I had heard about this super Earth well before you ever had anything to say about it. It is mentioned in the Law of One as the planet Maldek. And way back when I first got into all this stuff, Richard C. Hoagland, and all the years I spent studying his material from 1993 when I read Monuments of Mars, he was very big on the idea that the asteroid belt was not something that would normally appear in a solar system. So when we see these asteroids, your direct knowledge is asteroids. It also includes orbital perturbations in the solar system, and it includes all the comets. And so he was of the belief that the comets were the pieces of ocean from the planet that froze and turned into ice, water ice. And von Flandern traced back all these comets and showed that they all actually, you dial it back, they all come to a single point of origin. Like that was where the oceans went to. So did you hear anything like that about the comets in Brilliant Pebbles? There
was ice in a certain region that came from the failed planet.
So that would have been the oceans that freeze-dried in space.
Right, the water from the planet.
Yeah. He was coming out of the military faction of the space program, and we're going to do a whole episode just on that. But he said that we're seeing a debris field of a ruined planet.
Yes.
And Hoagland's top insider told me about something called Brilliant Pebbles. And when you and I started talking, there was audible shock from you on Skype when I mentioned Brilliant Pebbles to you.
Right.
And why was that?
Because I'd heard of that program.
So could you, I can kick in some of what I heard about it, but this is mostly about getting you to talk. So what did you hear about Brilliant Pebbles?
A computer and mathematical program that was rebuilding from what they've studied of orbits in the belt, asteroid belt, to calculate back the size and density of what it used to be.